the Democratic Party's embrace of an identity politics that in certain spheres makes young, white, heterosexual men in particular feel like they're problematic by virtue of their existence.
From a position of privilege, equality can seem like oppression.
I debated a liberal TikTok star and an avid Trump supporter live on stage, and it got interesting. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our media, and our politics, all from an independent perspective. I'm excited to bring you guys a little update and some clips from a really interesting event I did with the Aspen Institute at their Ideas Festival alongside liberal TikTok star Dean Withers and a conservative influencer named Jamie Franklin. The panel was hosted by Jack Blanchard of Politico. Before we get into all that, as you guys know, my life is still in chaos. I just moved into this new Miami apartment, so no, this is not a good setup. I was just trapped in airport hell, got stuck in Aspen because of winds, had to drive all the way to Denver and then take a red eye. So yes, I look tired. No, I'm not at my most stunning or gorgeous today, but I am still dedicated and contractually obligated to bring you a show today. So you know what? We're going to do it and we're going to make it work. All right. So without further ado, the topic of the panel was about Gen Z and how TikTok has changed youth politics. And so we had an interesting conversation about that and about the rise of new media versus mainstream media. But there were a couple heated points, particularly that came up around the topic of why it is exactly that the Democratic Party and the left have lost the support of Gen Z men. Dean and I had very different theories about why that's happening. Let's take a look at the clip.
I see Gen Z men skewing right and Gen Z women skewing left, perhaps more so than other generations. I certainly didn't anticipate this because when I started my career, it was all about how young people love socialism, young people were very left-wing. I think the pandemic changed things for a lot of people. I think they lost trust in a lot of institutions. School closures were really harmful, and they happened everywhere, but they were significantly worse in many blue states under many Democratic governors, and people hold them accountable for that. Then I also think, and TikTok amplified this to some extent, there was a cultural narrative that I don't endorse what a lot of them flocked to, in that I'm very critical of Trump, I'm very critical of kind of modern right-wing politics, but that pushed a lot of young Gen Z men away from the left and away from the cultural left that Gen Z women, many were drawn to. I mean, you can only hear like explicitly said that men are trash so many times on social media before you start listening to terrible people like Andrew Tate, who tell you actually men are awesome. Right? And so, but whether it's that,
why did I make that face?
Of the Democratic Party's embrace of an identity politics that in certain spheres makes young, white, heterosexual men in particular feel like they're problematic by virtue of their existence. And I think the Democrats, many have started to reckon with and move away from that. But peak 2020 era, it was pretty extreme. And I think a lot of that fueled people towards Joe Rogan or these other platforms that then liberals pretty foolishly seeded, right? Part of the reason that many of these podcasts skewed so right-wing is because the hosts actually don't know anything about politics, so can just be led wherever they want by the guests. And for a long time, many Democrats and progressives wouldn't go on them. They didn't want to, talk to somebody who has had transphobic tweets or something. But in reality, it's like, okay, he still has millions of viewers, and you're trying to convince the public of your opinion. I see this changing, but not enough, and I think some of the damage is done with some of these young men who've been pushed away.
And, I mean, the left can't even say what a woman is at this point. And so they can't define what a woman is. And so when you can't even define to younger people what a woman is, and you're telling people to use their pronouns all the time, and you're telling people if their certain race or their gender is bad, you're going to see people are alienated by that.
Regardless if you agree or disagree, is that you feel like the messaging that was coming from the left at that period of time was alienating for a lot of young people. That's basically what you're saying. Whether you agree or disagree with the political points, it's exactly what Brad was saying as well. Do you agree with that?
Phenomenal. Well, I think from a position of privilege, equality can seem like oppression. And I think something that the left has really failed at in recent history is finding a way to make that clear with the use of educational content and not saying, just coming out with like the one-liners of, I don't know, like men suck or whatever. But I don't know. I haven't heard that. I'm a man. I'm huge in left-leaning politics.
Wow. So there's a lot to unpack about that clip. Really, I know it was a long one, but I just wanted to let it roll so you guys got a sense of the exchange and the dialogue. And I rolled my eyes multiple times during that when other people were speaking. I mean, I agree kind of with what Jamie was saying, but the way she phrased it was a little bit cringe. And then when Dean said, well, sometimes when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. I just about rolled my eyes so hard I gave myself a concussion. Seriously. Like, especially because in the same verbal paragraph, he said, Democrats need to stop these one-liners. Babe, you just did a cringe one-liner literally like 5 seconds ago. Rewind the tape. But it's just funny to me because that is something you hear, but what's interesting is that there's a false premise baked into that statement that when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. The Democratic Party pretty openly doesn't stand for equality, right? What does DEI stand for? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not diversity, equality, and inclusion. And many of the democratic and liberal policies that I was criticizing here in the identity politics realm are explicitly anti equality because they embody the equity ethos of the we need reverse discrimination, or we need to right historical injustices with current discrimination to fix it. I mean, this is explicitly the kind of DEI rhetoric that's embodied in many democratic and liberal policies. So to say equality feels like oppression, our whole issue is that it hasn't been equality. It is not equality when people are racially discriminated against and held to different standards in higher education admissions. But that's the affirmative action regime that Democrats in lockstep defended, that held Asians and whites to a much higher standard than other races in terms of GPA and SAT score. And it is incredibly statistically apparent when you look at the numbers. This all came out during the Supreme Court case about it. In the same way, it is not equality when you're a Democratic president in Joe Biden and you specifically say, I will only appoint a black woman to the Supreme Court for my nomination. So you just categorically rule out most of the legal community, right? Most white women, all men of all races. Same thing with his vice president. He said, I will only pick a woman. And I'm strongly leaning towards a woman of color, narrowing the list down to just a couple people out of all these potential candidates in the Democratic Party. That is not equality. So, no, it's not that people feel like, oh, I'm used to this comfort and privilege, and discrimination, which historically absolutely has existed against women and in favor of men. But it's not that, well, now we just stand for equality and people who are used to privilege don't like that. It's like, no, equality is not in the room with us. We've had this toxic, discriminatory, divisive approach to identity taken in the name of equity that is at its core anti-equality. Seriously, the Republican position has been equality under the law on many of these issues, and the Democratic position has been woke reverse discrimination. So no, it's not just that white men flock to right because white heterosexual men in particular, because they're used to privilege and they're mad about equality. That's not it at all. And I'm surprised Dean doesn't get it a little bit more, just because also he hasn't encountered particular rhetoric and ecosystems and spaces. Well, he's also very young, and I chatted with him. He seems like a really nice guy. I think he's really smart, but he's also very young. I think he's like 21. And so when a lot of this peak identity stuff was happening, he would have been like 14, 15, right? During the 2020 era. So I think maybe just because he's missed some of it or he's not plugged into the online circles where this stuff is still commonplace doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Now we're going to get to this next clip where I did call out Dean directly. No shade, just a little bit of shade, but we're going to get to that. But first, make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button while you're at it. Comment with your thoughts. Check out the merch linked in the description. Subscribe to my second channel and Send in your voicemails for Voicemail Friday episodes where I react to your woke horror stories and your personal life scenarios and give you my honest advice and feedback. The link to send those in is in the description. Artificial intelligence is the future, and video editing is no different. Today's sponsor, Opus Clip, is a pioneer in this space and turns 2 years old this June. I first encountered Opus Clip as the coolest cutting-edge AI video clipping service, but it's evolved into much more than just that. Now, Opus Clip is the leading AI growth tool for creators. Opus Clip now helps creators save time and stay consistent by automating their entire short-form video workflow. With the new auto import feature, Opus Clip can automatically pull in your latest YouTube videos and instantly auto edit your videos into social ready clips. You can also select specific playlists for smarter import control. And coming soon, the auto scheduler will allow you to bulk select clips and schedule them for when you're out of the office or on vacation, so your content keeps going live. This makes it easier than ever to stay active across multiple platforms with little effort. You can try out Opus Clip and even participate in their Clip the Future contest over the next month and get free credits or potentially even win a MacBook Pro up to $5,000 cash or other awesome prizes. Head to www.opus.pro/clip-the-future now to check it out. Now, let's take a look at the second clip where I did have to call Dean out because he was denying in the course of this conversation that Democrats really had a messaging problem. And I did have to bring up his recent experience that I covered on the show where his planned anti-Trump TikTok tour with all the stars from TikTok imploded over microaggressions. Take a listen to this clip.
So, about the marketing of the left, I think that the biggest issue with why we've seen this trend in younger Americans going more to the right isn't the idea that we don't know how to define what a woman is, but it's more so the idea that the right has been able to ingrain themselves in the culture. Rather, if you're a man going to the gym looking to your favorite gym influencer on the internet, chances are they support Trump, or a woman interested in learning how to bake sour bread dough. You were telling me earlier, chances are the content creator giving that to you supports Trump, and I feel like the root of this issue has to do with issues within the DNC and the Democratic Party not necessarily being as good as they could be at their messaging. Now,
On the messaging, though, Dean specifically, so you're kind of...
You're going to say this without making any political points?
No, I mean, this is specifically about what you asked about.
Okay.
You were just involved in an effort to organize an anti-Trump tour called the
true.
Unfuck America Tour. Well, guess what, guys?
I like this audience.
The Unfuck America Tour descended into chaos over imaginary microaggressions that
That's not true,
occurred in a
Ben.
TikTok live. I watched the whole live. The microaggressions, which is not a real concept, first of all.
Yeah.
To the extent that it is, there were no microaggressions on the call. In fact, the white woman accused of microaggression was actually pretty vociferously racially abused by the women on the TikTok live. They tried to organize a tour to resist Trump, all the liberal stars of TikTok, Dean and many of his friends, and it imploded over internal fighting over microaggressions. If that's not a messaging problem, I don't know what is.
The moderator really didn't want me to get into that, and I understand. I wasn't trying to derail it. I wasn't trying to even take shots at Dean. Like I said, I like Dean. I think he's sharp. I just had to point out that he was saying, well, like, it's the Democratic Party that has messaging problems. Our actual message as liberals is strong. And I had to point this out. You literally couldn't even organize a campus tour, all these stars of left-wing TikTok, without the whole thing imploding into a massive scandal of infighting over microaggressions. Like, that's beyond parody. And like I said in the clip, if that's not a messaging problem, I don't know what is. Like, I struggle to imagine a more clear example of that because you can't even get your advocates out there on the road because you're so consumed by inner civil war over woke absurdity. Like, the Democrats, it's not just the party. It's not just the DNC that has a messaging problem. It is the left. It is liberals and progressives online and in media who still cling to a lot of these absurd ideas. Like, most Black people in America do not think that a microaggression is a real concept. But the TikTok stars that somehow big parts of this movement are held hostage to still buy into this absurd logic that, like, minor verbal tics cause some sort of harm and people need to be held accountable for them. it's all just so antiquated and it's really holding them back. And as long as you're in denial about that, I don't really see how you're going to get past it. So that's why I brought it up. It wasn't even trying to shade Dean. It really wasn't. It was just like, this is a hilarious example that the messengers on the left are the problem as well, not just the DNC and the Democratic candidates for office. In fact, I think the problems that the Democratic candidates for office and the DNC have are often driven by the fact that they're afraid of the activist and media left. And so they do what they want, or they pander to them in ways that are not palatable to the rest of the country. So I thought that was a funny moment. But the third point that I want to show you from this debate was, I think, potentially the most interesting and the most substantive of anything that we discussed. And it was during the Q&A. None of the questions were like hostile or gotcha or crazy or anything like that, which is always a concern because with live events, Q&As can go off the rails pretty quickly. But one person asked us about freedom of speech and censorship online because we had talked a lot about the perils of kind of misinformation and fake news and misleading things spreading on TikTok and on other platforms. And I thought we had a really interesting exchange. Take a listen to this.
What is your position on mediated content to reduce the amount of intentionally false information being fed to me?
All right, thank you. That's a very good question. I'm going to start with Brad, actually.
So I think it's a real problem. I see misinformation on TikTok. I see it on X all the time with different political valences. I don't trust any central authority, particularly a government authority, to decide what is true and what is false. And I would rather have a messy, chaotic, free flow of misinformation than have a centralized authority with that kind of power. That said, I don't think we're helpless in the face of what is a very real problem. I think the solution is teaching people media literacy to critically think, and also community-based things like even Community Notes on X has brutally fact-checked Elon Musk multiple times on his own website. So that's given me some faith that you can implement things that come short of kind of centralized censorship, but still provide context or facts or challenge misinformation or false information that's spreading like wildfire.
I think that there's a healthy medium. So I think that some of the points that both of you just made about not having a centralized government kind of decide everything for the consumers of these platforms and what they can or can't post or what is true and isn't true. I think that there's a lot of scenarios where you guys are spot on. We shouldn't have that because then those who are in power can control, what is true and what is false. So I think that the happy medium is saying, well, okay, here is a base set of facts that can't be false. And if somebody says they're false, take their post down,
No. How did that work out in COVID?
I think that
Facebook labeled the lab leak theory disinformation and took down experts. Now the FBI
if you allow me to finish speaking, Brad, what I'm saying is I don't think that if an election hinged on 50% of the population believing that, the Earth was flat, you should be able to go on Twitter and tell 1 million people that the Earth is flat. Now, with that being said, what I will also say is that the advent of decentralized forms of accountability, such as Community Notes on X, is something that I love. I couldn't agree with you two more. I think that there should be some base facts that should be protected, not by government, but by the mediators of these platforms. But then anything outside of these base facts that can't be contested, regardless of your political ideology, some decentralized form of accountability, such as Community Notes on X, is a great thing. And on that, we can agree completely.
But the facts are the heart of the dispute.
I think when you
when
you censor people, it creates more conspiracies.
So I really enjoyed this exchange, and I like this clip because to me it shows the shortcomings of kind of the milquetoast liberal position on freedom of speech, which always goes something like this. Like they will absolutely pay homage to, free speech is so important. I agree with you. And maybe we don't want the government involved with it, but if these big tech companies want to just censor people who question the facts, that's good and important. And maybe they don't know this, or maybe they do know it, and that's why they support it. But part of the problem is that when I say I don't trust a centralized authority to decide what's true and what's false, I mean the government first and foremost. But I also mean these tech companies, which have done a terrible job at that in recent years. And overwhelmingly, their employees skew in one political direction. So even if they tried to do their best job to be fair and neutral, they're still going to have very strong biases that will kind of take the form of their moderation decisions. And I just cannot disagree more profoundly with this idea that, well, we can allow people to have their opinions, but we just have to agree on the baseline facts and then don't let people question the facts. I mean, the problem is that on so many issues, the facts are the dispute. I mean, Democrats believe, for example, that it is a fact that most Democrats, that the transgender representative, Sarah McBride, is a woman. Republicans believe that it is a fact that Sarah McBride is a man. Now, I think we need to have that conversation, but you literally cannot in a situation where one version, and I think we all know which version it's likely to be, is declared the facts, and the people who are questioning the facts get censored by Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or what have you. We all know, I mean, on so many issues, the facts are the core of the dispute. And also, the idea that there's like some established notion of what the true set of facts is isn't correct. We saw this during COVID, where things labeled conspiracy theories or ended up being potentially true, and where claims evolved and shifted over time. Where what? So at the beginning of the pandemic, when they told us don't wear masks, then they switched to yes, wear mask. Like, at what point were those the facts and you weren't allowed to question it? Right? It's just such a messy endeavor that I think inevitably leads to the squashing of actual debate and disagreement, and kind of perfectly encapsulates the problem I have with the mainstream liberal perspective on free speech, which always falls back on this kind of tyranny of the experts or technocracy of, well, we'll just allow the big platforms to crack down on people who question the facts or the science. I mean, yeah, even an issue we talk about on this channel a lot, and I don't know what Dean's position is, so I'm not even trying to necessarily say this about him, but the question of minors transitioning and whether it's ethical, whether it's safe, whether it's supported by the data, the facts originally, they told us minors don't get surgeries. That's a fake myth. Then we pointed, insurance filings came out that showed thousands of minors getting surgeries. They claim that, this care is life-saving, as I've covered in the show. That is not factually true, but that's a fact, according to many of these liberal media outlets, that they would turn to, the tech companies would turn to. They've just parroted this claim from activists. So really what happens then is that one side of debates gets ingrained as the facts, and then the other side gets cracked down upon. And then Jamie mentioned there at the end that it leads to conspiracies, and I actually think that's true. Like, when you censor people, it doesn't necessarily make them weaker or take away their influence or their followers. I mean, I didn't include this in the clip, but I did bring it up on stage. After 2020 and after the disgrace that was January 6th, the social media companies banned Donald Trump. Facebook, Twitter, all of them literally deleted his accounts. Did he go away? Did he lose support? Was he successfully combated because he questioned the facts of the election? No. It just made people support him more. It made them go to platforms where they only saw people that shared their kind of conspiratorial views about 2020, like Truth Social and Parler and what have you. It didn't achieve any of the desired goals. And now, look where he is now. Look where our country is now. So this approach of, we'll just allow the enlightened big tech companies to censor and decide one version of the facts has not gone well for the country or for liberals, honestly. So I thought that was a really mistaken and misguided position to take, but I thought it was an interesting exchange and one that revealed a lot about the differences in the way that people like Dean and people like me see the world and see freedom of speech in particular. But what do you guys think? Did you enjoy watching these clips? And honestly, I'd be interested in having a longer conversation with Dean in some capacity, in some form in the future. But do let me know. I will link to the full conversation in the description. And make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button. Comment with your thoughts. I do take the time to read the comments. Always love hearing what you guys have to say. Remember to send in your voice notes. Check out the merch. Subscribe to my bonus channel. I just uploaded a video with my mom making her react to furry videos. So if you want to check that out, it's only over on my bonus channel. Go subscribe to that. And with all that, guys, we'll talk again real soon.